What if you were handed a crown and a death sentence in the same breath? Welcome back to our channel. Today we're exploring a story that feels less like history and more like a brutal, tragic footnote. We're not talking about some medieval legend or ancient myth. This happened in the 20th century. We are talking about a king whose entire reign could be measured not in years or months or even days, but in minutes. For the Kingdom of Portugal, a nation with a monarchy stretching back nearly 800 years, its breaking point came on a cold February day in 1908. It was a day that saw a king murdered, a dynasty shattered, and an heir become king, only to die moments later. This is the story of Luís Filipe, whose fleeting 20-minute succession to the throne marked the violent beginning of the end for Portugal's monarchy. To truly grasp how a European monarchy, one of the oldest in the world, could disintegrate with such shocking speed, we must first look at the state of Portugal in the early 1900s. This wasn't a kingdom confronting a foreign invasion. It was a kingdom in a state of advanced, quiet decay, rotting from the inside out. It was a nation haunted by the ghosts of its glorious past, an age of explorers and a global empire, and completely paralyzed by the problems of its present. For decades, the political landscape had ceased to be a functioning government and had become a complete sham, a hollow spectacle dominated by a deeply corrupt and cynical system known as rotativismo. This system was the very definition of political theater. It was not a system of genuine democratic competition. It was a cynical gentleman's agreement between the two major political parties, the regenerators and the progressives. They didn't truly compete for the right to govern. They simply traded power back and forth between themselves by design, in a choreographed dance of faux opposition. This elaborate charade ensured uninterrupted stability and influence for the ruling elite, a closed circle of wealthy men who ran the country exclusively for their own benefit. Elections became a meaningless ritual, a foregone conclusion that delivered absolutely nothing for the common people, who watched as the same faces and same policies returned again and again, just under a different party banner. This hollow political stagecraft bred widespread apathy and a growing dangerous conviction that spread like a cancer through the nation. The entire system was corrupt, stagnant, and completely beyond the possibility of reform. The government wasn't just failing its people, it was actively and contemptuously ignoring them. While the politicians played their self-serving games, the nation itself was crumbling. Economically, Portugal was, for all intents and purposes, a failed state. The country had been forced to declare bankruptcy not once, but twice, in 1892 and again in 1902. These were not just financial crises, they were moments of profound national humiliation, a public admission to the entire world that the nation was incapable of managing its own affairs. The economic collapse triggered massive industrial unrest, with violent strikes and protests becoming a common feature of life in Lisbon and Porto. The working class, facing low wages and terrible conditions, felt they had nothing left to lose. By the turn of the century, the economic disparity was staggering. Portugal's GDP per capita was a mere 40% of the Western European average, a statistic that translated into daily grinding hardship for millions who saw no hope for a better future. Imagine living in a country where nearly 3/4 of the population, a staggering 74%, was illiterate. This profound lack of education wasn't an accident, it was a consequence of neglect. It created a permanent underclass, trapping generations in a cycle of poverty and powerlessness, unable to participate in a modernizing world. This created fertile ground for deep, simmering resentment. A powerful rage was building against a monarchy and a ruling class that seemed utterly indifferent to the suffering of its people. The opulent palaces, the lavish royal lifestyle, and the well-fed politicians in Lisbon stood in stark, unbearable contrast to the crushing poverty of the nation. But perhaps the deepest wound of all was the one delivered to the nation's pride. In 1890, this humiliation was given a name: the British Ultimatum. Portugal held a grand, almost mythical ambition known as the Pink Map. This was a bold plan to claim a vast, contiguous stretch of territory in Africa, a pink-colored band that would connect its colony of Angola on the west coast with Mozambique on the east. This dream of a renewed African empire, a callback to Portugal's golden age of discovery, was the nation's last great imperial hope, a chance to reclaim a measure of its lost glory. But it clashed directly with Britain's own colonial ambition to build a Cape to Cairo railway. Britain, Portugal's oldest and most trusted ally, showed no sentimentality. It issued a harsh, brutal ultimatum: withdraw your forces from the disputed territory immediately or face the overwhelming might of the Royal Navy. Powerless and utterly humiliated, Portugal had no choice but to submit. The event sent shockwaves of fury through the country, sparking riots and an outpouring of nationalist rage. The monarchy, seen as weak, incompetent, and incapable of defending the nation's honor, took the brunt of the public's blame. It was in this soil, fertilized with national shame and economic misery, that the Republican Party, once a fringe radical movement, began to grow into a formidable and popular force, promising a new future free from the failures of the crown. At the very center of this swirling political storm sat King Carlos I. He was a complex and deeply contradictory figure. On one hand, he was an intelligent and highly cultured man, a noted patron of the arts and sciences, and a passionate, pioneering oceanographer whose work was respected in scientific circles across Europe. In a more peaceful and prosperous era, he might well have been remembered as an enlightened monarch, a king who advanced knowledge and culture. But he was not a king of peaceful times. To many of his subjects, struggling with poverty and national humiliation, he was seen as extravagant and hopelessly aloof, a man seemingly disconnected from their plight in a time of profound national crisis. His lavish lifestyle, his frequent hunts, and his opulent palaces became potent symbols of the monarchy's indifference to the widespread suffering, making him an easy target for Republican propaganda. Facing a paralyzed political system, a bankrupt state, and the rising tide of public anger, King Carlos made a fateful and desperate decision in 1907. He chose to abandon the conventions of constitutional government, taking a radical gamble that would ultimately seal his fate. He appointed a man named João Franco to rule as a dictator. Franco was a political strongman, and he was given the power to govern by decree, effectively sidestepping the gridlocked and corrupt parliament altogether. The king saw this as a necessary evil, a form of emergency surgery to save the patient. On the surface, Franco's official mission was a noble one: to clean up the cesspool of government corruption and finally implement the essential economic and social reforms that the feuding political parties were incapable of passing. To achieve this, he dissolved Parliament and began to rule with an iron fist. An immediate and severe crackdown was launched across the country. He silenced the press, shutting down newspapers that dared to criticize the government. He brutally broke up public meetings, sending in police to disperse any gathering deemed subversive. Most chillingly, he began imprisoning Republican dissenters and other political opponents without trial, filling the jails with anyone who spoke out against the new regime. The king had intended this as radical surgery to stabilize the country and save the monarchy from collapse. Instead, it achieved the exact opposite. It was a fatal miscalculation. The dictatorship was not seen as a solution by the people. It was seen as the final, undeniable proof that the monarchy itself was incompatible with liberty and progress. Franco's authoritarian rule didn't just anger the Republicans, who now felt completely justified in their revolutionary stance. It turned huge segments of the population, including many former monarchists who had once supported the throne, against the king. His actions validated every accusation the Republicans had ever made. By endorsing a dictator, the king had crossed a line. The appointment of João Franco was no longer a political strategy. It was the monarchy's death knell, a self-inflicted wound from which it would never recover. It convinced a generation that the entire royal system was rotten to its core and needed to be torn out, root and branch. Beneath the surface of this visible political turmoil, something far more sinister and organized was brewing. In the shadows of Lisbon, in hidden back rooms and clandestine meetings, secret societies, inspired by Italian revolutionaries and utterly committed to radical, violent change, were plotting the monarchy's demise. These were not mere political clubs. They were clandestine organizations bound by secret oaths and a fervent, almost religious revolutionary zeal. The most formidable and ruthless of these was the Carbonaria, a semi-mystical organization with deeply held republican and anti-clerical ideals. Its members were not interested in political debate or gradual reform. They were apostles of a doctrine known as propaganda of the deed, the idea that symbolic acts of extreme political violence could shatter the aura of the old order and inspire a nationwide revolution. They were convinced that a single dramatic bloody act could serve as a spark to awaken the masses from their apathy and bring the whole rotten structure of the monarchy crashing down. For the Carbonaria, the path to a new pure republic was not through elections, which they saw as a sham, but through blood. They saw King Carlos and the ancient institution he represented as the primary obstacle to Portugal's future, and they were prepared to remove him by any means necessary. The conspirators meticulously laid their plans, setting the date for February 1st, 1908. They acted like hunters stalking their prey, studying the royal family's routines, charting their movements, and identifying the perfect moment and location to strike. The chosen assassins were dedicated members of the Carbonaria, men who believed they were acting as patriots. They included a schoolteacher and former army sergeant named Manuel Buissa, who was renowned within the organization for his skill as a crack shot, and an editor named Alfredo Luís da Costa. These were not common criminals. They were ideologues, utterly convinced that their act of murder was a necessary sacrifice for the birth of a new Portugal. While they finalized their deadly ambush in Lisbon, the royal family, King Carlos, Queen Amélie, their 20-year-old heir Crown Prince Luís Filipe, and the 18-year-old Prince Manuel were away from the capital. They had been enjoying a winter retreat at the historic ducal palace of Vila Viçosa, a traditional and peaceful royal residence. They were scheduled to travel back to Lisbon by train and then by ferry, completely unaware that their entire journey was being tracked. With every mile they traveled, with every turn of the train's wheels, they were heading directly into a perfectly planned trap, an intersection of history from which there would be no escape. The quiet of their family retreat stood in chilling contrast to the violent reception being prepared for them in their own capital. On the morning of February 1st, 1908, the royal family began their final journey back to Lisbon. After traveling by train, they boarded a steam-powered ferry to cross the wide Tagus River. Upon docking on the city's shore, they stepped into an open-top carriage for what should have been a routine procession through the streets to the royal palace. In a capital city that was simmering with revolutionary anger, where the king's life had been threatened before, and with a dictator cracking down on the populace, this decision to prioritize ceremonial tradition over basic security was a fatal and inexplicable error. Riding in an open carriage, a symbol of royal accessibility, made the family a completely exposed and vulnerable target against the backdrop of the city. It was a terribly misjudged gesture of confidence in a city that was on the verge of exploding. The carriage entered the grand commercial square, the Praça do Comércio. The vast open space was surprisingly ominously sparse with onlookers for a royal procession, a fact that should have served as a dire warning to the royal guard. Hidden among the few people dotting the arcades of the square were the assassins, their weapons concealed, waiting patiently for their moment. As the carriage rolled slowly past, Manuel Buissa, the former sergeant, calmly raised a rifle he had concealed within his long overcoat. In an act of cold, practiced professionalism, he dropped to one knee for stability, took aim and fired. The first shot was devastatingly accurate. It struck King Carlos I in the back of the neck, severing his spine and killing him almost instantly. He slumped over in his seat. His reign ended in a single violent second. In a heartbeat, the calm of the afternoon was consumed by chaos and horror. As screams erupted, another assassin, Alfredo da Costa, seized the opportunity, leaping onto the carriage's side step and brandishing a revolver. In an astonishing act of defiance and maternal fury, Queen Amélie stood up and tried to beat him away with the only thing she had, a bouquet of flowers, all the while screaming, "Infamous, infamous." The heir to the throne, 20-year-old Luís Filipe, showed incredible courage. He rose to his feet, drew his own concealed service revolver, and attempted to defend his family, firing at Costa. But he was shot in the chest by the assassin on the step. Before he could effectively return fire, a second bullet, fired from a distance and likely from Buissa's rifle, struck him as well, mortally wounding him. His younger brother Manuel was hit in the arm, an injury that was serious but likely saved his life by causing him to crouch down, making him a smaller, less immediate target in the mayhem. The royal guards, reacting to the unimaginable carnage, immediately returned fire, cutting down the assassins. Buissa was shot and killed on the spot, while Costa was captured but died from his injuries shortly after. In the pandemonium, the carriage driver frantically whipped the horses, not racing towards the intended destination of the palace, but careening towards the nearby naval arsenal in a desperate, panicked search for medical help and safety. And it is here in these frantic, bloody moments that we arrive at the tragic technicality that defines this entire story. According to Portuguese law, succession was instantaneous. The very second that King Carlos V died from the assassin's bullet, the crown and all its responsibilities passed immediately to his heir, Luís Filipe. For the chaotic moments that followed, as the carriage sped through the streets as he was carried, bleeding and dying, into the arsenal's infirmary, the mortally wounded young man was, technically and legally, the King of Portugal. His reign, however, lasted for only about 20 minutes. He died from his catastrophic wounds inside the infirmary, with his mother, the now widowed Queen Amélie, cradling him. The 20-minute king was dead. While he was never officially proclaimed, his brief, tragic succession is recognized by Guinness World Records as one of the shortest monarchical reigns in history. In a single bloody afternoon, Portugal had lost a king and his successor. The crown, stained with the blood of his father and brother, now fell to the 18-year-old Manuel, who had just witnessed their horrific murders from inches away. Completely unprepared to rule and deeply traumatized, he ascended the throne as King Manuel II, a monarch who would become known by the heartbreakingly apt title, the Unfortunate. One of his first acts was to dismiss the dictator, João Franco, and call for a government of national unity, hoping this desperate act of appeasement might calm the turbulent political waters. But the move was not seen as a gesture of strength or reconciliation. It was interpreted as weakness by the emboldened Republicans. They saw a terrified boy on the throne, not a commanding king. The old political parties, freed from Franco's control, immediately returned to their corrupt and self-serving squabbles, proving that nothing had been learned. Crucially, the new government failed to conduct a serious investigation or prosecute the masterminds behind the regicide. The assassins were dead, but the powerful men who had armed and directed them remained free. This catastrophic failure made the new regime look incompetent, powerless and unable to deliver even the most basic justice for the murder of its own king. The instability became terminal. In the 2 short years of Manuel II's reign, Portugal cycled through 7 different governments. The political system was broken beyond repair, lurching from one crisis to the next, with no direction or authority. The final act of this long tragedy came on October 5, 1910. A Republican rebellion, long in the planning, and now with crucial support from within the military, erupted in Lisbon. Warships anchored in the Tagus River, controlled by Republican sympathizers, even bombarded the king's palace, a deafening and terrifying symbol that the monarchy's last line of defense had turned against it. Realizing that resistance was futile and would only lead to a bloody civil war, King Manuel II and the royal family, including his grieving mother, Queen Amélie, fled into exile. After nearly 800 years, the Kingdom of Portugal was no more. A new republic was proclaimed, and with it came radical changes: the separation of church and state, the abolition of nobility, and a new flag and anthem. This first Portuguese republic, however, born from violence and instability, would prove intensely unstable itself, lasting just 16 years before being swept away by another military coup in 1926, which eventually led to the Estado Novo dictatorship. King Manuel II lived out the rest of his life in England, dying without children in 1932. His mother, the Dowager Queen Amélie, survived until 1951, living in France. There is a persistent and heartbreaking legend that when her body was finally returned to Portugal for burial, she was dressed in the same gown she wore on that terrible day in 1908, its fabric still stained with the blood of her husband and son. The reign of Luís Filipe lasted only 20 minutes, but his true significance isn't measured in time. His death, alongside his father's, was the violent climax of decades of political decay, national humiliation, and revolutionary anger. He stands in history as a great what if. He had recently acted as regent and undertaken a successful tour of Portugal's African colonies, showing a modern outlook and a sense of duty that many hoped would revitalize the monarchy. Could he have saved the institution where his younger, unprepared brother failed? We can never know. What we do know is that the story of the 20-minute monarch is a profound human tragedy. It is the story of a promising young man born to the pinnacle of power, whose future was violently extinguished before it could even begin. His fleeting phantom reign serves as a brutal reminder of the fragility of power and marks the exact moment a kingdom that had defined a nation for centuries was brought to its sudden and bloody end. If you find these forgotten chapters of the past as fascinating as we do, be sure to subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments what other historical figures with tragically short reigns should we cover next.